always asking for people that follow people. So, there's a lot of big rigs in there and a lot of shallows and movies. I was just looking for. I'm tired. That's the facts, Jack.
We were in Grand Rapids, road trip through the, like, a couple of people got me back. Shop. No.
Anyways. I think we're spot on with the mom. We can read these.
Well, we're like a minute before 6, but I don't know if anyone else is
Let's
attending.
get it
So
going.
let's get, we can start. Join, if you could note roll call for us, and if you're able, please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, as part of the workshop, we always have open forum. This is an opportunity for citizens to talk about any concerns related to the city. Please limit your time and state your name and address when you come forward. And first one on here is Don Ship.
Hi, Mr. Mayor, how much time do I have? I want to be respectful to everybody.
You know, we try to keep it at 3, but there's not a hard stop at 3 minutes, but you know, whatever you have to say.
Okay, all right, I try to be concise, and it's going to go beyond what the time limits are, because it's a story. In March of 2016, I was asked to attend an airport commission meeting here, in this very room. I sat right over there. My father, he was on the very first airport commission. And we have a long family background at the Forest Lake Airport. I sat here and there's a proposal by the Airport Commission, an attempt to charge hangar owners $85,000 to help pave the runway in 2016. Now, where did this come from? It came from Council Member Ed Eigner saying that those airport people need to get more skin in the game. Now, when a person builds a hangar out there, the hangar builder pays for all the development costs, the city share. The other part was paid by MnDOT Aeronautics. They pay all construction costs. They pay inspections, everything, whack and sack, everything. On an annual basis, we pay very expensive insurance because it's in a commercial zone, it's zoned improperly, it should be multi-use, and the city needs to be specifically listed, covered by our insurance. It's very expensive. We pay for everything. The other part is paid by MnDOT Aeronautics. That's one of your biggest stakeholders at the airport. MnDOT Aeronautics gets its money from gasoline sales, lease overflies, that's a big one, aircraft registration. You could say it's aviation funded. So anyway, there's many partners at the airport. The Airport Commission presented this, and it came from Rick Ashback. I will send all the council members a copy of this. It was to charge hangar owners $85,000. I sat there and I spoke against it. My father voted against it. He was the only commission member that voted against it. All the rest of them voted for it. And there were other people that spoke out against it. It was not a recorded session, but you'll see my name in the minutes for the Airport Commission, March of 2016. I later found out that every single commission member knew that that was a contract violation. Now, the city council grabbed that proposal and they embraced it and adopted it. And then they passed a fee schedule, and it was prorated over 10 years to charge hangar owners $280 over 10 years. Mike Freer at the time, he said, well, we can't put a 10-year limitation on it, and it might have to go up. The very thing my dad feared, that's one of the reasons my dad was against it the entire time. He said, the city will just come for more. We pay our fair share. We got an attorney. The city has been notified every single year concerning this contract violation, and restitution has not been made. My bill, the bulk of it, was paid by a council member. I had to do 2 data requests to find out who paid it. Sam Husnick Construction paid it. What an embarrassment. Chief, I went to the police department because how can that not be a bribe? Bribery is illegal. The police department failed to entertain the possibility of legal action. I don't see how that's not illegal. The other people, certain people did not pay the fee. Those amounts have been expunged from their records, and those that have paid, they haven't paid those people back. I encourage the council to consider, just read the contract language, and I will send you a brief report. In many areas, the city has called this rent. What are we renting? We rent lots at the airport on a square footage basis. That's it. It's not rent, it's fiction. It's a lie. And the city tried to kick me off the airport, and all it does is motivate me even more every single day. I encourage the city to do the right thing. I went over on time. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Doug Schiff.
My name is Doug Schiff. You may recognize the last name. I'm not here to advocate for a relative who had his charges absolved. I'm here to advocate for the other guys out there that own hangars that actually paid the charges. And so we have an imbalance that I think needs to be corrected, and any good goal needs a deadline. And I haven't seen a deadline on this goal to correct. I know that, Mr. Mayor, you have agreed with me verbally that yes, you understand that's an imbalance and it needs to be worked on. I understand there are other pressures within the city, but we should have a deadline for this goal to be resolved. And I hear recently that there are projects in the works for expanding the airport. That's a good thing. Some of it might be bad, but overall, it's a win for the airport. However, when you make something bigger that already has problems, the problems can grow with that growth. And I'm looking at this situation we've got out there. We've got an imbalance between people who've paid and haven't been refunded, an illegal charge that was never in their contracts to begin with. The second, that could be discrimination, and I don't think the city wants to get into that. There's a second point of discrimination between commercial operators and private operators, and someone paying a private lease rate on a hangar lot who happens to be renting out space in their hangar because we build them bigger than we need on purpose so we can fit other stuff in there. But then you rent out that space, you really ought to be paying a commercial rate, and because it's not fair to other commercial operators because they're paying a higher rate. The third point I wanted to make is if we allow people to take up residence in their hangars, that can be considered an imbalance, because why wouldn't I sell my property and save taxes by moving into my hangar? I don't wanna do that because that is not the intent, and I know that. But we know that there are people living in their hangars. And again, a goal should have a deadline. And there should be an eviction at some point, and that needs to have dates. That's all I'm asking for. Let's have some finalization in these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak? No. Right, with that, we move on to our first item, and that is strategic plan and work.
All right, Julie, if you can bring up on the screen or just a couple of little quick slides. Wanted to just take a few seconds to recap our Saturday strategic planning meeting and kind of just get a little bit of a flavor for where we want to go next. It was, even though it was a 6-hour day, felt like could have had some more time out there and didn't want to leave us hanging too bad here. So this was the kickoff to what I would call the 2026 strategic plan. Want to be clear that, this is not a one-year plan, but at the risk of getting too wordy, calling it the 10-year, 2026, or the 2026 to 2036, or whatever it might be. This is kind of what we're calling it. A couple of takeaways. The main takeaways here, what our consultants kind of left with us with, which is that we landed on 2 strategic priorities, and really, again, kind of part of the conversation tonight is about whether or not we go beyond these 2, because I think we picked 2 because we had time for 2. Maybe that's where we end up. Maybe we had 10 more. Who knows? Strategic priority number 1 we landed on was invest in improved infrastructure. Strategic priority number 2 was attract more business development and redevelopment. I carefully thought through those words, and I think those are 2 very valid goals or priorities, however you want to call them. I think we will expand on those. And some of the expansions, I did a little bit of summary work on some of those things that were left from the consultant here. Sort of the action strategies coming out of those priorities are continue our legislative efforts. So we've had a lot of success here at getting legislative help for some of our projects. We want to continue that effort. It's been fruitful for us. Want to continue to stay involved in legislation and continue to advocate at the legislative level. Use sound planning principles, so making sure that we're not just chasing a shiny nickel, but we're having a well thought out plan, that we're just getting into the mandated part of that comp plan process here, but we want to make sure that we stick to our plans and still saying plan your work and you work your plan, that kind of a turn of a phrase there. So re-examine funding streams. We've done a little bit of that. Last meeting we approved some franchise fees, and we're looking at exploring very early stages of exploring a local option sales tax if that idea has some traction. But just examining all those ways that we get money, which is not all that many ways, right? Most of our levy, most of our budget is paid for by the levy, the tax levy. Then do a little bit of work educating the public, and this isn't to indoctrinate the public, this is to get information out to the public that the public wants, and quite frankly, sometimes has the right to demand. So we want to make sure that we're getting the information out to people that is important to them. Action strategies for strategic priority number 2 would be that we want to partner, and that word partner I think is very important. We've established the idea that perhaps over the last decade there's been some challenges with whether or not we were a partner and rather than maybe an adversary or having some other type of relationship with builders. Sorry. Got to click faster against it.
I guess, I'll mess around with the timer next time.
That's okay.
On your computer. It just wants you to talk less.
Yeah, right. It's a sign from
Your time's out.
a sign from the AI gods here. So again, just build that culture here within City Hall and any outward facing items that we have to make sure that we're a partner with builders developers. establish a clear incentive policy. You know, we've had some TIF districts, we just decertified a couple, so that's great news. We've done incentives before, it's not something new to our town, but we wanna make sure that we, establish some real clear priorities with those, and, so people come into our town can know what to expect, and we're not reinventing that wheel every time. Certainly, there's a customization that comes with every site, especially in the redevelopment world, and everything is negotiable, but I think setting some parameters about when and where and why we wanna use incentives, and when and where we don't, it would be excellent in our overall strategy. And then, improve aesthetics, and that's a very broad, brush thing, but it did come up in a number of different comments, in terms of our ability to attract and retain development, and just in terms of overall quality of life, overall, attractiveness of our community to developers as they, look for the next place to expand their business. So those are two very solid, things that came away from our retreat. I think we should be proud of that work that we did, and I'm excited to build on those two things. What I wanna make sure we do is not miss anything, so put together a quick little word cloud from some of the other comments that were, that we went through as a team on that day. I think you can see kind of a trilogy there of the city, the community, or the residents and the staff. Sort of how is that interrelationship between the three of those entities? What is the city? The city is the residents, the city is the staff, the city is our council and community. You see infrastructure and improvement. I think you see engagement there, public engagement. Some of those things have kind of left out. Then some other things that just sort of stood out to me in conversations we had afterwards. And since that day, you know, I know that both Alan and Rick commented that, you know, while they felt like they were full participants in the meeting, somehow we got through 6 hours and hardly talked about police and fire at all. And maybe things are just going so great in those two departments that didn't need to talk about them. But you know, I think, you know, half of our budget is, as you will see tonight, it is coming from those two entities along with building inspections. So probably merits some discussion in terms of our strategic plan. So maybe something around public safety. We've also heard a lot about organizational stability and the importance of that. We heard from our classification and compensation study consultants about the importance of that stability in our workplace. We hear from our rating agencies, the folks that continue to give us a high credit rating, about the importance of stability. There was a lot of questions for Jessica and I earlier this summer when we answered those. Keeps our credit rating high. And just a lot of chatter in the development community as well about, you know, wanting to work with stable governments and folks you can trust that are gonna be there tomorrow, right? They wanna make sure that there's some continuity there. Strategic, I just numbered these 3 and 4, obviously there's 5 and 6 here as well, but didn't really get into sort of the taxation side of things, right? Like what is our limit of, you know, we only have so many funds. Certainly everything we talk about in terms of how does that relate to how much money we have to spend or want to spend. And maybe some a little bit more clear goals in terms of taxation limitations. I know we talked a little bit about the Hugo strategy of having a flat tax rate, not a flat levy, but a flat tax rate. So that might be something we could explore. And then, you know, lots of talk about recreation these days in terms of, we have some changes coming in terms of our, relationship with FLA and the maintenance we're gonna be doing on some of the fields. One of our next hires is related to that. There's been some recent investment in parks. And so I thought, again, parks and recreation might be a topic of discussion. I guess I'll just go quickly back to that. With all that blabber from me, I'd love to hear some thoughts from the council, other staff on what we might have missed. And I don't think we'll probably get to 10 priorities on the strategic plan, but I think, you know, typical plans might have 3, 4 strategic goals, right? And I think landing on those 1 and 2, those those first two are very good, but, is there a third or fourth one that we wanna look at? Take conversation about that tonight.
Any thoughts, council, on that? Obviously, staff as well.
I think our organizational stability, I think, is very important. Not only the staff that we have now, we have a good, strong relationship, working not only amongst yourselves, but with the council. As we bring in new people that we are hiring, that we get good, solid staff and everybody to work with.
Yeah, I think as it relates to public safety, I like the first two strategic priorities that we've landed on. We need to continue to invest in infrastructure like we have over the last few years. And that development and redevelopment is critical. I think where public safety fits into that is just, some of the work that is being done with this year's budget, with the right hires, to right size this, the staff related to calls, increased calls, which, theoretically will only get higher with more rooftops coming in. And then the work that, I know Chief has planned to get in front of some of these businesses and do some of that work that's missing as far as planning is concerned. So, I think as it relates to public safety, those are just two things that come to mind for me as it relates to that. And as far as recreation, it's really a big one, right? All right, as good as it sounds after all.
I think the recreation thing too is, it could go, see cities that have very, very small programs, really no recreation programming, I'll call it. They have parks and infrastructure, they don't have any programming, to cities that run full-fledged softball leagues and everything from soup to nuts, right? And so, where do you wanna land in between, what's our future there? I think, again, having a well thought out plan and not just jumping into a bunch of things is a good spot to start. And, we just made a hire, in Kyle not that long ago that, has been really growing into that position and doing a lot of things with that, particular relationship with the school district and FLA. And, so what direction do we wanna push Kyle in? Maybe what he's doing.
I think, so the first two are great. I was expecting we'd pull another one out of there in that time. So I agree, I think one or two additional would be great. I think also maybe part of the process could be if each department had a strategic plan for their department to kind of to bring forward to the council and not get our blessing, but just as a check-in and how that would be, the umbrella strategic plan of the city would be underneath or above those certain departments might be helpful, and make sure that we're all going the same direction. Maybe that's during a workshop or something after.
Yeah, I think actually we had prepared some of that information and didn't actually get to it during the meeting. We could certainly circle back to that. We had some slides already prepared. There's a little bit of a chicken and egg there. It's always, the department heads can bring strategic initiatives to the council, but oftentimes that might come the other direction too. Say, department heads, here's our themes. What do you want to do strategically? It's more strategic action plan maybe, but we can certainly bring some of those ideas back and circle back on that as well. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow at our department head meeting and see if we can consolidate the group's thoughts into a couple, one or two more action or priorities.
Partner with builders and developers. We've had a great opportunity here with a complete, really big change with building going under community development. We've got a new building official, and getting out in front of these builders and having maybe a round table to determine whether it's perception or reality that Forest Lake at times is hard to deal with as a builder or developer. And so I think we've got to maybe the first of the year, we get in front of some of these people, invite them in for breakfast and just say, we're here to work with you. We want this development, because we've got big change there, which is exciting for the city. So, just a thought there. Staff, anything else comes to mind?
I see Ryan at the end of the table there, and as the next slide here, I did last time there. The next slide I had was just, I wanted to put together together a 10-year timeline and just start to populate it with big things that are happening to us. So as I looked at that and I started putting it together, maybe it's because I'm a civil engineer and that's what I focus on, and a lot of the big things that are coming at us are road related. And while we have infrastructure investment as a top priority, is there anything else that wants to revolve around that, or maybe just build off of that? Certainly we've begun a little bit already with trying to strategically plan out the big three that we had to talk about in the last time. Is there anything else related to roads, other infrastructure? I guess maybe that first one is maybe sufficient, and we'll build off of that. But just in the timeline here, 2027, the Public Works building. I thought about for a minute, maybe I should have big arrows and little arrows, but they're all pretty big things. But if you look at that Public Works building, the current cost is a big arrow. Some of these other street projects are pretty sizable as well. And then you get the comprehensive plan here that we're going to be involved with from 26 through 28, and got a great opportunity there to shape our future from the ground up, and that's of course from the zoning and through a number of different departments there that plan touches. And then 2033 and 2034 is kind of that bond cliff that we have, and that's the time when we have those large annual payments come off the books. And so just in terms of magnitude, you look at that as a little under $2.5 million that comes off the books. And of course, in 2 years there, comparing that to our current levy estimate of around $16-ish million, that's a pretty big percentage of your levy. Now, of course, your levy will be larger probably by the time you get up to 2033, but it'll still be, if you can imagine your levy being at 20 million, that's 10%. More than 10% of your levy. So that's a big opportunity to leverage that, what coming up there with how we shape things and how we time things out here. Certainly, we've looked at that with the Public Works building, whether or not we should shape the debt a little bit to ease the burden now and take advantage of that cliff a little bit later. So anyway, I thought it was an important milestone in our 10-year future here to think about on the horizon. So, anything else big that I'm missing there in that timeline? So there's a bunch of those type of things in terms of our water and sewer CIPs. So two reasons I didn't put them on there. One is that this is about the general fund levy, I thought, in a certain sense. The strategic plan is about more than that, right? But as this relates back to the budget, which is tonight's topic, I didn't put anything on there. I think probably there's a second slide here with utility type stuff, right? And a different timeline. The second reason I wouldn't put it on there right away is just that those things are so much more related to the pace of development than they are the actual calendar year. And so I think a timeline that also shows population growth would be appropriate, right? So here's the years, but here's the anticipated population growth. So you can almost cross off the years and just watch that population growth and say the water tower comes at boom, this time or that time, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I use water tower generically for any big, whether it's the next water plant or the next lift station or whatever it might be out there, so.
Great. Well, thanks again for putting that together and for everyone's time. That Saturday was a good exercise to go through.
Yeah, so I think what we'll probably end up doing then is, over the next month or so, get a outline of the strategic plan put together and get it for sort of a January, I wouldn't call it adoption necessarily in January, but kind of a final draft in January for us to, final draft of the overarching parts, and then we'll use that first quarter to kind of flesh out the details of the things, right? So get our overarching goals and priorities set January, and then use the next couple of months to build out that pyramid that comes off of those three things. So if that makes sense to everybody. Okay.
Thanks. Next item, comp plan. Abby.
story of Imagine 2050. So some of you who have been on the council for a little while have heard the tagline Imagine 2050. I won't do it every time, but it's kind of fun. Trying to make it fun, right? So Imagine 2050 is the Met Council's regional planning process. That process is a decennial, every 10 years, regional process that starts with the census. With that census data, the Met Council updates its regional development guide. So this is the guide and the guiding documents for transportation, land use, housing, parks, and water. And water is the wastewater, essentially. And from that, what they do is then they develop these regional system plans. So as a region, these are our goals. This is where we're gonna grow, how we're gonna grow, how we're gonna develop, this is what we're gonna plan for. And then as part of that, so now we're on number 3, we're moving into number 4, we're in the system statement section of this 10-year, this planning process. System statement is kind of a direct order for cities and counties to say, hey, City of Forest Lake, here's your statement, here's how you're going to need to draft your comprehensive plan to make sure your comprehensive plan matches the regional development guide, the regional plan. So this starts the kickoff for our local plan developments. This process of the system statement issuance gives us a pretty limited window to make amendments or make requests to the Met Council on amendments to our system statement. If we don't request an amendment, then the system statement will be finalized and they kind of say, away you go. 26 to 28 by December 31st, you need to have a comp plan ready to go and approved by the Met Council. Any questions on that factor? So the process right now with the system statement that I'm bringing this to you is high-level education, but also staff has looked through the system statement and looking to see if there's anything in the system statement the council wants to object to or make an amendment, request an amendment to. What makes that amendment process a little tricky is we don't get to request amendment to their policy. So how they came up with our numbers or our directive, it's the specific, meat and potatoes in our directive that we can request amendment to. Doesn't mean though that we can't still write letters that say, hey, Met Council, I told you before, we may not like this. First, maybe being the community designation. So something that's a little different this year, this 10-year plan, so the city's always had this split designation. Can you see that okay? I know it's a little, yeah, I can. Oh, did you say,
Long way, another one.
Oh, there
it's
you
gonna
go.
get really dark. Woo! As long as you can see. So that split designation, everything on the west side is designated as suburban edge. That's our urban development area. These are our metropolitan urban service areas. Everything that's kind of that bluish green on the east side is diversified rural. So what the Met Council has said is, hey, City of Forest Lake, for all those lands guided for suburban edge, you need to have an average density of 3.5 units per acre on your future development areas. We're not going to take into consideration what your density has been in the past. We're not going to consider any of the land areas you've already analyzed or developed in the past, just the future development areas. Everything on the east side in that diversified rural can be 4 units per 40 acres. Same as rural residential, 1 unit per time. So this is an area that staff has identified and the city has identified as an issue. So in the existing comp plan, the 2040 comp plan, we were classified as emerging suburban. And an emerging suburban area, so that suburban edge was emerging suburban, only had to develop at 3 units per acre. So the Met Council actually went through their process when they were talking about getting rid of the emerging suburban. They said, you know what, cities aren't meeting this density. Nobody's meeting the 3 units per acre, let's increase it to 4. And at the time that they adopted their land use plan, the land use committee, I don't remember exactly the name, and the full Met Council said 4 might be too much, let's drop that to 3.5 units per acre. So one of the things, again, going back to, we can only request amendment to what is in our plan. We don't get to necessarily request amendment to our 3.5. That's a regional number, everybody's gonna have it. But as Mark and I were talking about, we think that there's still some value in writing a letter to state our opposition to that increased density. And for a couple different reasons. One is that we've already said, hey, this is hard for us to achieve this density as it is. You're only letting us do this on the new developed area. You're never taking into consideration our historic land patterns. And two, when they wanted to go to 4 units per acre, the Met Council staff said, we're gonna let these cities be flexible though in what they're netting out and how they're achieving their density. The Met Council hasn't come up with those policies or those flexibilities. So essentially they're saying, here's your book, but we're not gonna necessarily let you know how you get to be flexible in achieving this. I'll come back to all of these so we can kind of talk through them. The other one area that I bring up is housing growth. The Met Council has scaled back its housing growth projections, so housing population and household growth projections across the metro region. I think that they were ambitious in thinking the region was going to grow, and for a variety of factors, maybe isn't growing at the same rate that they thought that it was going to. So, not included in your packet, I included our 2020 actual. Our population doesn't matter as much right now. The big thing we're focusing on is households. If the comp plan limits when the comp plan limits households, that's kind of our max growth during that time period. So for the, let's just say 2030, right, in 2020 our actual is 8131. If we were at 1,131 and we're getting close to that 10.5, and we had a subdivision that came in that pushed us over that 10.5, the Met Council can deny that request because we are exceeding our growth quicker than the comp plan said we could. So you can make you can request an amendment to the comp plan, but there's no way that we know that we would get it. And the biggest reason is the Met Council uses those household projection numbers to understand their infrastructure capacity when it comes to wastewater. They're building out their systems, they're making their capital improvements based on everybody's future projections. It's just one of the reasons those numbers exist. So when you look at our 2030 projections, 2030 projections, 2020 projections, we are exceeding what our 2020 projections were, but we're probably not on track to meet what our 2030. We're going to be, which is why they're drawing them back in the 2050 plan. So one of the reasons that staff is a little concerned about this, as well as a region, we may not be growing as quickly as the Met Council once thought. We're in a unique position in the metro region in that we're just north of many of the communities that are drawing their water from the White Bear area. And any of the communities that are in that White Bear Lake area who have some potential water appropriation issues, the Met Council has actually pulled their numbers back even farther. So what the Met Council is saying, hey, you might have some water supply issues. We don't think you're gonna be able to grow like you think you wanna grow. And my theory is, if that does happen in the future, development's gonna leapfrog. They're gonna say, Rhino, you go, whoever, it's great, we would love to be here, but you don't have water for us like us. And so this is another area that both Mark and I have talked about, potentially wanting to challenge the increase of those numbers, because we are gonna have pretty high growth decades, these next couple decades, with the amount of undevelopable land on the fringes of the city. Stand with me? Fun stuff. Revenue And then the other one that I bring up is our affordable housing allocation. So what the Metropolitan Council does is they forecast how many affordable housing units are gonna be needed in the timeframe of each plan. So we plan for 30 years, the plan is really 10 years. And the forecast for the whole region is just under 4,000 units. So what they do is they take that 4,000 and they take the developable land area and they just do basic math, and that's how each city gets a pre-adjusted future local allocation. Now what happens is they say, okay, let's just say it's 100 units. What they say is, hey city, if you don't already have a bunch of existing affordable housing, we're gonna increase your affordable housing numbers. And if you have a high prevalence of low-wage jobs and workers, we're gonna increase your numbers again. So, while we go down in the total number of units required from our existing plan to our future plan, I am a little bit concerned that these numbers might be slightly skewed. And a big part of that is we do have quite a bit of naturally occurring affordable housing. What did I hear you say earlier today, Mark? We have, or Alan, 47 apartment buildings? 53 apartment buildings. These aren't brand new buildings. These things are aging out. This naturally occurring affordable housing is something that should be taken into consideration, which they say they do. But the other one is this low-wage jobs and workers. So in our 2040 comp plan, we guided a whole big area of the city for highway business. And in this next 10-year round is when that land kind of opens up for that urban development. And if you just take the acreage and how many jobs there could be in that area, we're starting to increase our potentially low-wage jobs, which is then essentially just making us increase our numbers. What the Met Council has said is that adjustment of our 600 is possible, and that usually ends up getting washed out when you end up developing your land use plan and recalculating. But we really do want to kind of put them on notice now that we are going to be looking at a comprehensive land use analysis, and the combination of our existing affordable housing stock and that future low wage, I think is going to kind of turn those scales a little bit. So these are the areas that we've identified as needing council discussion of whether or not we want to make a request to the Met Council for amendment to our system statement. I already mentioned some of this stuff is going to be a letter. There may be a hearing, and we may just sign and say that's nice. But we do think, both Mark and I do think, that it's worthy to put these comments in writing in front of them. So the first thing is about our community designation, and whether or not so much we support that split designation of suburban edge and diversified rural, but whether or not how they're allowing us to calculate our densities to achieve those is something we should comment on. I also bring this up because I think all of the council has been contacted by various members of the community about just the city's participation or our stance in the Met Council boundary, and whether or not we're going to fight the system. And this is the time to at least state our opinion of designations. I know that there has been advocates for us to try to get out of the Met Council boundary, or to not develop to those standards, but the Met Council is the sewer authority, and we need them for our utilities. We don't have that utility here. And the Met Council has been known to deny sewer connections for developments that aren't meeting the city's comp plans or overall density goals. So that's the first thing. I'm gonna turn this up because it is kind of weird to I mean, that's definitely something that we can ask, but those rural service areas don't have the urban services. So if we're gonna consider going to that rural center, that means we're moving away from urban services in
So
those
that's
developments.
And this is kind of why Abby and I discussed it, probably isn't gonna be worth our time to fight our community designation, because there is no, can't go into court, because they decided, well, we'll solve this problem, we'll eliminate that lowest category. We don't have that emerging sort of edge anymore as a category, so it's probably you can't fight the designation, but I think that even just making a statement, the more they hear it, from, in writing from communities, that just isn't a realistic number anymore, to try to meet. And especially, we also wanna talk about how it's calculated, the fact that stormwater ponds and other things that shouldn't be included in that density are included. And that, you know, that density does not take into account previous density that we already have built on. We have a fairly dense community already. And it doesn't really reward us for that. It says, well, yeah, but we need these many units going forward. And so whatever's left to be developed, that's what the units gotta get. And I get that math. There could be a reallocation of that math based on what we've done in the past. And it's probably will go nowhere, but I think it is important sometimes just to put it out there, your opinion on these things, and make it known.
We know what our density is now. If they calculated, took into account everything that we already have, where do we sit?
I don't know that number. It is something that I think as we continue to update our comp plan, those are some of the things that I would like to look into, just in terms of additional housing and land use analysis. Comp plan doesn't require us to have that, but I think we should be establishing some of those baselines of, okay, Met Council, you want us to hit this. Here's our future land use plan, this is how we can hit this. Oh, by the way, this is our actual density in these areas, so that we can start kind of, I don't wanna keep saying pushing back, but stating, hey, we get where you're going, but we were already achieving this, and now you're just making us more dense in a lot, denser? I don't know, more dense. It's what time on a Monday. But I mean, just recently we had Amberley Woods preliminary plat. They were just at about 3 units per acre. But we had 2 big outlots that were storm ponds. If we took those out, Amberley Woods development we're gonna find is probably more like 5 to 6 units per acre. And the more that we can kind of show them the practical application of what I would say is their academic policies, and how it is actually affecting or being applied, is I think the way that they're gonna start being able to consider rolling back some of these policies and encouraging more flexibilities.
Really, you saw what that looked like in real terms, and that those are the smallest lots you can really imagine. Those might be just fine, and we work through that, but yes, those are viable, but that's at the edge of that density. You know, in order to get an average, you gotta have some that are higher and some that are lower. Really the only way to go higher than 3-ish units per acre is to go row home condos, right? And those are all fine private apartments, of course. And that's all fine, Danny, we have plenty of that stock in our existing community. But for the average development to look like 50-some foot wide lots, with no backyard to speak of, really is difficult to imagine the rest of our community building all like that.
You look at this suburban edge area, and you just try to imagine a part of it that's not been developed yet that will be. I mean, if we met those, is it possible to hit that 3.5 number with what we have there? You know what I mean? Like, this is blew out over the next 10 years.
Well, and so that's a citywide number, right? So you take, so much low density, so much medium density, so much high density through the community, and you disperse that by acreage. And Mark likes to use the dials, let's not do the third one. You know, if you wanna turn up your low density residential, the old Forest Lake, right, our little like villa lots or whatever, we want more of those, great. we want more of those, we're gonna also then have to turn up our high density elsewhere, right? So there's a way to achieve it, it's just how do we achieve it in a way that we're still feeling like we're keeping our community character? When I first started, we were constantly having trouble meeting that 3 units per acre in our low to medium density residential development. And that's why we changed our MXR1 zoning district to 7,500 square feet, right? Those are some little lots. You look at Old Forest Lake, and some of those lots are even, they're comparably sized to Old Forest Lake. I keep hearing this isn't Forest Lake, this isn't Forest Lake. Okay, if Forest Lake is slightly larger, 10,000 square feet, 12,000 square feet, you have to optimize that someplace else with other acreages that have higher densities.
Well, right, I mean, that's where, by Menards, you got all those newer apartments, right? There's other sections of town that have a lot of apartments. We envision more of that as we build on that highway district. You have Costco, you're not gonna put 10,000 square foot, a whole right line of Costco. You're gonna have apartments, and you have some townhouses, and then you have.
So when you're talking about that's high, and that's a great point, and that's one of the land areas that would need to be analyzed. The Highway 61 corridor, we added a lot of mixed use, which we're starting to see want to go high density. Whether or not we want to see that corridor of high density, or we want to preserve some commercial through there. But then that highway business area in the southwest corner of keeping kind of some of that higher density or that highway business non-residential along those corridors, but then kind of feathering back higher density medium to low.
Right.
I think this next round gives us a good opportunity to look at that and to then reevaluate that kind of lower to medium density residential in the middle. I personally think the 3.5 can be achievable by reevaluating our land use, our future land use, but also by taking into consideration existing land use and what we can net out. There's some combination in there that I think we could get this. I wouldn't advocate we get much more than that, right?
Right.
It'll make it harder the next time, because the next 10 rounds, next 10 years, we're just gonna be getting pushed probably into the suburban stuff, but. So I see some nodding head, go ahead.
No, I just wonder if anyone else has any questions. I need to push back. That's the right term, really. It is. We're being told how our community should be. Then on the other side, you have planning commission members, a lot of other public that's upset that we're allowing these smaller lots, but we're forced to do that. And I go back and forth on smaller lots. I've said this before. It's affordable housing is not just older apartment stock. It's smaller lots, so people can afford to come up before so they can build a nice home. So push back. It's the right term.
I think we do, and I think when we get into the comp plan and we really start doing public engagement and some analysis on land use and housing, that's gonna be the time where we're really gonna start to be able to play with those dials, really look at where is it that we wanna concentrate those higher densities, so that we can preserve some of those little bit larger single family lots. I do agree with Mayor Roberts though, like little lots are the way of the future. This is what the development community is building. And it's not to say there aren't developers out there that will build on a half acre. It's just the national builders are building small houses, small lots, big houses, small lots.
So you mentioned in the next 10 years it could be suburban. We don't have any long-term plans to have infrastructure all the way out to like, I don't know, July Avenue to the south and along 202nd or something like that.
So it's a great question. I was gonna just end this conversation with this kind of comp plan update timeline, preliminary. This is just really high level right now. Starting or in 2026, we'll have finalized that park system plan that the Parks Commission is updating right now. That's gonna help feed then into some of the public engagement of what ends up in the comp plan. We'll start those utility system plans, so water and sewer, and there definitely is gonna end up being some conversation in that water sewer planning, and that kind of starts to get into land use and housing too. So the specific timeline, it's not like we'll probably just months, there's probably gonna have to be here's some information, now we need to do some housing and land use assessment to be able to kind of go back to say, what does that do to that water system? And I know that there's been conversations about, I just still think it's kind of crazy, but about whether or not we follow a parallel pipe across the river and go up into, or across the lake and go up into that northeast corner. It's a big investment, but it's what is that trade-off? What is that capital infrastructure versus that benefit that we're getting? There's a lot of challenges with moving further east than Harrow and Imperial.
Right now, our MUSA boundary just extends past Harrow Avenue.
Yes. There are just challenges moving further east with cost of things, what is, just areas, all that kind of stuff. And development pays for it, so, but these are gonna be conversations we're gonna have through this
I
process.
suppose we need another 20 lift stations to get out there with all the terrain and everything.
So the next one that I ask about is how, so I'm hearing you want a little bit of pushback, even if we can't challenge this, at least putting them on notice, hey, here's some concerns we have, we don't love it. Housing projections, so between, the future projections between 2030 and 2040, they say we're gonna grow by 150 units per year, 2040 to 2050, 110. So in this time frame with 1,500, if we hit 1,500 in 5 years, so like some of those really fast growing communities that were really successful in putting 300, if we hit 1,500 in 5 years, we're gonna be having to do a comp plan on that. So staff would recommend that we do ask them to reevaluate these for increase because we do think that there could be that leapfrog development effect from those areas that have some development challenges further to the south of us. Also, when you compare us to those communities further south than us, we are a standalone community. What did I say to Ellie when she maybe said it? I'm like, we got a lake, we got a Target. Like people like Forest Lake compared to some of our other communities around us because we have a traditional downtown. It needs some help, but you know what? We've got some really great things in a standalone community that make us a bit more desirable than some of those other suburban communities.
Go back to their, just, one more.
Oh, I'm asking.
There you go. So if we were at 81, 31, 2020, you know where we're gonna finish the year at, halfway through that decade?
I could get that number, I don't know right now. On average, we've been 60 units, 75 units a year, so is that about right? So if you think since 2025, another 3 units, maybe 500 finishing off this year.
8,500. So we're afraid of, it will surpass 9,300 by 2030 then? Is that your expectation?
No, because we'll, even if I get 100 units a year, that's only 9,000, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't account for necessarily an apartment building going in.
Sure.
We do have some prime high density parcels right now. I do think that 9,300 may be just a little low. It's probably realistic, but my concern is if we're starting that number low and then we're going a whole nother decade. This one isn't, I'm not as concerned about as much as the 150 a year this one's the big one that I would say we're most concerned about. Only growing at 110 a year. Now that being said, another 10, 15 years, we're gonna put in a lot of houses, a lot of units in the community. What was that?
How many are slated for 2026?
Right now, we don't have any final plats approved. We usually will plat through the winter until the spring. I'd have to go back and take a look.
But the last couple meetings, we just approved some preliminary plans.
Yeah,
We're talking a couple
Yeah,
hundred.
Amberley Woods was 65. We'll have the 4th phase of Hidden Creek, which is another 30, so let's say that's 100. Hidden Creek South, that one that moves back around to the Parkway, it's the hope that will plat next year, so we'll be looking at another 25 in that, so, maybe 150.
Just about 110.
Oh gosh. right, there's that 110 that's been hiding out for a decade
But
too.
but this is based on building permits too, so
Yeah.
those developments won't build out in a year, right? So it's probably a 3 to 5 year
Yeah.
build out for those. But to your point, I mean, you keep that pace up with that number of plats being, all of this is dependent on the interest rates and, you know, that kind of stuff, right? And that could change overnight, right, the way it will.
So what do you advocate for the,
I hadn't really done the math. I wanted to look just to see how low some of the percentages are. You know, we're at 15 and 10, how low those percentages really are in some of those neighboring communities affected by the White Bear water system. Well, that's not right to say, but because I think that would probably fluctuate. I'd say at least another 10% on these. At the very least, we don't have to have an amendment in here, aside from requesting reevaluation because we believe they're low because of the kind of that potential of leak for aquatic sugar. I'm not a great forecaster.
Well, that council's not even really, they always seem to be off. I mean, look at, you're looking at this, but so the 2040 comp plan said that 2040, 28,900, and the 2050 is saying 500 people,
less, or
500 more in
well,
less, actually, I'm gonna start losing it.
19. Yeah, I mean, they've reevaluated obviously, but yes, they've pulled back those numbers quite a bit. And I can see that for a lot of metro area communities, I really can, but I think we've been just far enough out of the development area that I don't think it's necessarily accounting for those homes that are bound to happen in areas that haven't gotten quite hit with development in the last 10 to 15 years like others have.
When we were in the planning of this building, and I don't know if you recall this or not, but the numbers the Med Council was using for us for like 2030 was gonna be like 32,000 or something like that, way high, and here we are, 25,000, like, do you remember that? Now, we were going over those numbers based on what the needs were for this building, and so it just historically, it just seems like they just overshoot and then they come back on us, and so we're trying to make decisions, like a public works building, on population numbers in a lot of cases, and it's hard to do that because they're so inaccurate.
So, what do you guys think? Should we ask for an amendment, reevaluation amendment on that? Okay. And then lastly, that affordable housing allocation. This is one of those ones that no matter what, I think that we should push back a little. I don't know what that number is, but I do think that we need to put them on notice that that large part of highway business, that's a lot of acreage, is going to decrease the number of jobs, which would then potentially decrease our allocation. I want to at least have a conversation with their staff about this one to really see how that could be effective, because my understanding is the affordable housing allocation gets finalized through your comp plan amendment process as you're allocating lands for, so you have to show you have so much open area for the potential for that future, trust me, Wayne, trust me.
Do you know what the average median income is that they're using?
I knew you would ask that. No.
It's around, it's around 115, 120 for a family of 4. So this is metro-wide AMI.
And I have it on my computer.
So that's based on a family of 4 then, what's what you're saying?
So this will probably be Washington counties.
Yeah.
We won't probably have to use that metro area, I don't believe.
There's a schedule of, so I say family 4 just so you can have a reference point of how much you're talking about, but for whatever unit type you're putting up, they have a schedule. So if you're putting up a studio apartment, they will say, here's the median income for what you would expect in a studio apartment, which would be a single person, right? So that median income will be different than if you're putting up a single family home where you'd expect a family of 4 to live into. So the median income is a chart, it's not just a single number so 114, yeah, so 120-ish, something like that.
And so the last few apartments that were not bad, what was the average number of units? Was there, and they're both pretty similar, all of them, if I remember it, weren't they?
Yeah, Chief, do you know off the top of your head in that Forest Ridge or what of the,
About 80 units.
yeah, that's what I was
Mark
thinking,
on
and
that.
Timber Ridge has probably 75 in each or so.
And have we tracked how, or talked to any of them, how fast they filled them, or they still have lots of vacancies, or few vacancies, or they full?
They're filling pretty good.
Yeah. I talked with Mark Lambert, the owner of Timber Ridge last week, and he said that they were very successful. And he said he's ready to see if he can do it in a project, so. Now, those are affordable units as a market.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, is we feel like we have, because that's a challenge too, we allow buildings to keep going up, but they're not building affordable units, that's not helping.
Right.
Go to that allocation question.
Yeah.
Which I know is hard to build.
So help me understand this chart over right.
Sure. So, there's 3 different brackets of the area median income. So what the Met Council is saying is in your next comp plan round, you're gonna need to build 30, at least 30 units for marketing for households that are making between 50 and 60%. So this is an area that went down pretty significantly in the last go round because we must have been building, it's not either preserving our affordable housing stock or had built some. The 30 to 51 is just a deeper, lower income. That's where we start to see the Met Council saying, hey, of course, like you're maybe doing okay in people that are making 60% AMI or more, or 50% AMI or more. But if somebody's making 50% AMI or less, you really need a lot more units.
So you wanted to challenge the 600 number or the allocation of 600?
That's a great point. I had thought mostly about the 600, not so much obviously the 50 to 60, but that kind of that deep affordable is obviously one of those areas that's a lot of units to put in terms.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, I'd be curious, like, if you look at the overall housing stock that decreased, you know, what we're anticipating from 2040 to 2040, is the drop here a similar ratio, number one, question one. Question two, I mean, what is a housing unit that somebody that's making 30,000 a year, what are we talking about? Because section 8.
Common bond.
Yeah.
Because you're talking.
This is all, once you start to get in, I mean, anywhere really 60% below, but once you get 50% below, there's no way you can do it without public subsidy.
No way to do building, that's what I always find
Right.
so crazy about this particular number is that they're asking you to build affordable units, and that,
Not preserved.
not preserve, I mean, the idea that you can even build an affordable unit is just, this not Copus Memphis, it doesn't, you can't do it.
Right.
What we ought to be looking at is, and I'm not trying to, there are plenty of programs that preserve housing, that's, Abby has been through some of that with you before, some of the stuff we passed off to the county, that funding that we get, that is helping to preserve stuff, but I mean, I look at your mobile home park and some of the aging apartments, those are the places that you can afford to live at under 50% AMI, right? You can't build new ones like that, that just doesn't work that way. It's unfortunate.
I would challenge it all.
Yeah, I don't know how you would do that.
The number, the allocation, but not including current stock. Challenge it all.
I did want to at least just revisit this slide really quick. So 2026, we'll be bringing back to you some sort of kind of process for this timeframe. The end of 26 or in 26, you'll see that park system plan come before you. We'll start working on those utility system plans. And then we will probably, I'm not sure exactly when, but in 2026, we'll need to determine a consultant that will help us. These types of plans need outside help. My understanding is the comp plan and I looked at it, the existing comp plan was a pretty major overhaul from the 2013 plan. So in my mind, it seems like we're just looking at an update, but at the same time, still need help with that. A lot of that help that we need usually is public engagement, and that costs money, and that's where those fees kind of come in. I do believe we have it budgeted in the CIP over those 3 years, but it might just be 27 fees. In 28 or 27, we also will really start digging into that housing and land use analysis. We'll probably do some when we're talking about those utility plans, but this is the area where we're really gonna, that's where the sausage is gonna get made in determining what Forest Lake is gonna look like in the long run. Early engagement process is really gonna be designed with, what is Forest Lake? Right? I think all of you and all of us have been kind of wrestling with that. You know, what is Forest Lake 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 50? And then in 28, we'd be doing additional public engagement once we have those chapter updates. And getting those chapters updated, we'd have plan adoption and that council approval. So we're still well on track. We've got plenty of time, we've got 3 years. But, you know, just wanted to at least give you the high level, this is where we're heading. So what I'm gonna do from tonight's discussion is put together a letter for the Met Council. I'm gonna call Met Council staff tomorrow, but put together a letter and a resolution for your formal consideration on Monday. That essentially places objection or puts us at least on their radar that we're trying to appeal some of these things. So, any questions? Great, thank you guys.
7, budget.
All right, we are on the home stretch of the 2026 budget preparation. The timeline for the budget was actually brought to you guys back in April. And then the next big item, there's a couple ticket items that came during workshops, but then in September, we did present to you a preliminary levy of 12.59%. And that was approved and that's what we submitted to the county. So where we are currently at through discussion within the workshops to follow is we have increased franchise fees based off of approval at the previous meeting. We are also increasing police state aid based off additional conversations we've had and what we've received year to date. There has been conversation regarding the sergeant position and then bringing back to overtime to sitting more at where if we have every butt in seats with being fully staffed. So with those adjustments, that brings our levy closer to that 9.25%. And so what we are really looking for council right now is to provide a direction on, are we comfortable with that 9? Would we like to see it lower? And if we would like to see it lower, we do have a few staff recommendations that get us to 8.9. Within the current budget that was brought forth, that did have a couple new positions, and if we remove the sergeant, we still have 5 additional positions. If we factor each one of those positions starting in February, that would bring our levy down to 8.9%. So I'm gonna have Mark pass those out. And so really just wanna get a feeling on where people are at and what that target number looks like.
So what you're getting handed out here is really just sort of the same thing you've seen before, but just with a couple additional, really just one additional item on the bottom here.
And that's just pushing that start date back from 1/1 to then budgeting it at starting in February.
Did you need this? That's why there's extras.
So you'll see that the couple of those things in the middle of the bottom chart there are sort of that, just delaying that start date to February 1. You know, and that's, wouldn't even have to really, it's not even gonna be necessarily be intentional, other, it's just gonna be the reality of trying to get people on board when we really can't advertise for the his positions until after at least our December 8th meeting at the earliest, right? Because we need to make sure that we pass that budget, then start advertising. By the time you advertise, interview, get people to quit their own job and come to us, February is even still fairly aggressive.
Yeah.
So certainly we can count on those budget savings and use that to lower our levy. So just to be clear, this 8.9% does include the elimination of the new sergeant. I know that there was some confusion on the paper's wording of that we didn't eliminate a sergeant, we are eliminating a future sergeant from this budget. So we're not getting rid of anybody who's currently employed here as a sergeant. We're just eliminating that from the next sergeant from the budget in 2026. And then again, as Elliot explained, that increase in state aid funding was just something we discovered through getting more information from the state that we had predicted would be lower, and then the state really, the legislature just didn't let that happen. I think there was a soft spot for public safety, and they made some things happen to make sure that fund stayed sustained at the current levels, and even increased a little bit. So.
We're talking about these two police positions, so potentially cutting, chief, any thoughts on that? Obviously not ideal, but doable, or
What's that?
about cutting, you know, if these are some of these options here. Are you okay?
Staff recommendations down below? You mean
Yes.
The sergeant?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, yeah, we discussed it, and I completely understood. I thought you meant the two officers.
No.
That's a.
Yeah, just to be clear, so in next year's budget with this 8.9 would be 2 patrol officers and administrative
Additional, two additional
Yep.
patrol.
2 patrol and an office worker, yeah. And so the only, of the 4 that were originally proposed in the preliminary budget, the sergeant is the only one that's off of that list now.
Sorry about that,
Yeah.
misunderstood.
No,
That's
you're-
why this
you're-
look.
Okay, or comfortable with that? or-
Yeah. You know, it's gonna take, as Mark mentioned, you know, when you're hiring a police officer, the posting of it, the interviews, if there's any other kind of written tests, then there's the background, the psychological, the physical and all that, I mean, that can take 2, 3, 4 months. So I think even for February, that would be really pushing it and driving one of the people.
And you can push it further in February if you want. We put that number in there because it was a fairly easy thing to do across all the positions and be very comfortable with that. Remember that these positions are going to be in the 2027 budget, so the more you push that start date and take those savings in this budget, the more you'll have to then realize those gains or undo those savings in next year's budget, right? So for every percentage we pull this budget down, that's going to add a percent to next year's budget, right?
Can you revisit the idea of going back, say, the capital equipment? You have 3 capital opportunities on there. Just talk through that again.
So it was just a very general idea that you stretch out what you're gonna buy. You know, if we're talking about capital equipment, if we're gonna buy 10 trucks in 10 years, we buy 9 trucks in 10 years. Now, the folly of that, of course, is that there's a reason we buy trucks so often, and there's a cost benefit to the cycle that we have. And so, does this math really account for that? No, it just assumes that everything will be equal, and that's probably an unfair assumption, but it's a pretty simple, quick and easy thing to do. I think when you get to roads and parks equipment, it's a little different. Certainly there's a value proposition there in the cycle that we replace things there as well, but there's really not quite as much of that because there's not the salvage value that you have in the capital equipment fund. So again, if you were gonna pave 10 miles of road in 10 years, pave 9, and you can realize this amount of savings. You're gonna put in 10 play structures in the next 10 years, put in 9, and you can realize the savings. Those are what I would call real cuts, in that those aren't gonna come back necessarily. You're simply lowering the level of service and lowering the amount of things we do. So those are real cuts to spending. If you wanna talk about sort of that idea that you need to cut spending, that's what you're doing. You're spending less on things that you, there's a gray line between wants and needs, right? How good is a good street?
So this rollback, is the idea there that you're cutting that much out of next year's budget, or you're cutting that much out of next year's budget and future budgets? Like we're
Cutting that,
lowering.
yeah, well, I looked at it as cutting 1/10 out of the 10-year plan. So that allows us to then lower the amount we put into the 10-year plan. So you have this side pot of money for capital improvements. And each year we, let's say it's that 10-year.
1.5, or 1.5, we're just cutting from 1.5 to 1.35.
Yes,
We cut 150 out.
correct.
We talked again about these police positions, but it was mentioned a little earlier, I think just the new park position, and I don't know if anyone can kind of go
Yeah,
through that a little
David
bit.
can probably speak to his new hire that's planned there.
Yeah, a big part of it is we took over the maintenance for Friendly Fields, so that'll be this person's summer job, and then have winter jobs, this thing, increase trails and snow removal and all those practices. Just a factor of all the parks that maintenance that we're doing will increase, it's just matching the dollars, trying to match the dollars that we're spending in the parks.
Is there plus recoup on getting more fees back because we're taking those duties over from Claw, or not really?
Not really, I think our fees will increase 20 to 25,000 annually. That's kind of what they were meaning, and we were gonna even out on field maintenance. Unfortunately, it's not a money-making activity, it's more of a offering that service.
How many miles of trail have we added lately?
Well, we got a lot. I think just the ones that we added Everton, 97 was halfway done this year, Greenville we added. 32 is proposed, and everything that we seem to be building out, major collectors having a trail on it, including Washington County or State, and ours. Proposing North Shore Trail, so it's just, it's kind of the way we're really training is.
And I always tell people too, 20 years ago, we started building, I would say we started building trails in the late 90s. And then most cities didn't think forward and think about, maintenance costs of those, and we're starting to catch up to that. But the other thing people, I don't think 25 years ago, or even 15 years ago, thought about was the idea that we would plow them in the winter. That just was like, why, it's the winter time, who's gonna be, and then that just culturally has changed. People see these trails and they wanna walk on them all year round. That expectation, and you saw in the news maybe, Minneapolis was, can't believe, considering having the city forces shovel everybody's sidewalk. The expectations of our culture are just changing, right? That's an extreme case. Dave's probably not gonna volunteer to do that.
Quite work.
But just I think it speaks to the idea that the services that are expected out of the city are just changing over time, and that's just a fact of life.
So is that am I looking at that, so all in $110,000 position? Is that what?
So that's salaries and benefits, so
Okay.
yes.
So is that a more specified person who has some experience in some other stuff, or is that someone mowing fields and maintaining fields and plowing? Like, that number just seems high unless that person has some expertise in something.
That'd be a grade 5, just that would be that position in grade 5, public works employee, immediately above what, public works doing. Definitely be looking for somebody with, parts experience, but
So that's our starting public works employee number.
So all in cost.
that's our only spot in public works of maintenance employees, is the maintenance operator one.
Go back to that equipment rollback. Have we evaluated, I know we've talked about this from time to time, I feel like just around evaluating our
Yeah, so
Cars
we,
lasted longer now.
right, so we've been hard at work doing that. The reason I didn't bring any information to you tonight is it just isn't real complete yet. One of the reasons is we're revisiting a topic that, apparently, was very close to being implemented and then sort of went away. Maybe the pandemic had something to do with it. But we were very close at one point to looking at a rental fleet instead of owning our own vehicles. So we're revisiting that topic, and have some of that information, but not 100% of it. Right? Doesn't do you any good to show you 80% of that information. And then we've also reevaluated that schedule of replacement costs. I think it's something that, we can look at again in 2027 in terms of this capital equipment fund. I think right now I'm just not ready to say that it's a great idea to cut a whole chunk of that out of there. I think that there are trade-offs there with maintenance costs. Again, these things were thought out 15 years ago. Has it changed a little bit? Yeah, but probably not like drastically one way or the other. A drastic change in philosophy though, to rent a bunch of equipment as opposed to, or lease a bunch of equipment as opposed to owning it would be a wholesale change. You have that number comes way down, but then your maintenance, your rental lease contract would be way up, and you look for an offsetting cost there.
Is that a thing other communities our size do, is lease equipment?
Yeah, so we are working through Enterprise, that was who the city previously worked with. I down with them 2 weeks ago, and, Stillwater works with them, Farmington works with them. There's 2 other of our comparable cities can't remember off the top of my head, but, and then, 2 counties within the state of Minnesota they work with. And so when we first started to interact with them pre-pandemic and pre-me being here, it sounded like it was a very new thing for them, but then they just have now started to get in more with cities, and within the last year, they completely took over Rosemont's police fleet and all the other public works fleets. And so he told me he'd have a presentation done for me today, but then something happened, and so now he's promising me next week he'll sit down with us, and so we have a meeting, the chiefs, Dave and Mark, will sit down and meet with him to see that plan and then really compare it to what our recommendation for a capital equipment replacement plan would be, and then see if we can find any cost savings and figure out what actually makes the most sense.
Obviously, it's not something we want to rush into, right? With our deadlines coming up here, I would advise you, if you're gonna try to cut further than what we're recommending here tonight, to avoid that topic, and just kind of putting a wild guess out there as to what we could really realize. You can certainly realize it in the short term, right? I mean, if you just put less money into that fund, fewer vehicles, that would work for a little while, but just, if we did our math right 15 years ago, that'll eventually catch up to us in maintenance and resale costs, right?
Mark, can you refresh my memory on, what was our 2024 and 25 tax levy amount? Do you know last year's tax levy amount?
Increases.
No, yeah, what was the amount that we levied increase? I know we talked about it, but I can't remember the number.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to calculate what the difference is between last year and this year.
9.6.
I want to say it was either 9.6 or 9.7.
So 9.6 or 9.7 is what we charged in 25?
Yep,
Was the increase in rates?
Increase, yeah.
yep.
Okay.
Year from now, it's double digits. 12, 14 good. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the fund balance we had at the end of last calendar year, did that buy down our capital, one of our capital funds?
Yes, your policy says that if you have an excess in the fund, in the general fund at the end of the year, that it gets put into the capital fund. And so that's what we would likely intend to do again this year. We are projecting a substantial, being under budget by a substantial amount, just because of all the vacancies we had on the staff. And so that would be our recommendation, that is your policy, that we would put that into the capital fund. How much that is and would sort of dictate how much you could then dial down, how much you put into the capital fund. And again, we have a pretty good idea, we're 10 months of the year, we could make an educated guess on that. right spot to cut right now.
Well, I'm just thinking if, I mean, look, I zeroed in on the capital equipment, one, simply because it's a nice round number, 1%.
Yeah, sure.
So if there is at least a fund balance of 150, I think it'll be significantly more than that. I mean, would it be fair to plan on bringing this, you know, adding that as a opportunity down here to bring this proposed levy increase down to 7.9? Is that a reasonable?
I would look at it, and this is just, there's no rule that says it has to be done this way, but if I was to say we were gonna have $100,000 excess at the end of the year, put that into the capital fund, I would recommend dialing down how much you put into the capital fund by $10,000, because you're gonna spread out that $100,000 over 10 years. So if you decrease it 10,000 next year, you would assume that that decrease stays steady, then you have that
Well, I
same.
think that's what we did last year, right? I mean, for this current calendar year, I feel like there was a significant fund balance at the end of 2024. And so our capital equipment line item went to 1.5 from say maybe 1.6, if you will, or maybe I wasn't that much, but you know, follow me?
Sure.
So any fund balance over 50% at the end of the year helps the next, theoretically, the next 10 years of levy projections, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, you know, if say we're gonna have a $500,000 excess above our 50% policy, is there anything stopping us from saying, hey, we'll throw $350 to the capital equipment fund and say $35,000 a year, we're gonna reserve 150 to keep 2026 levy 1 point lower?
No, the only thing that I would advise you to do that with eyes wide open is that if you just sort of take that excess and buy down, for lack of a better term, the next year's levy, is that means the 2027 levy, if you expect all is the same, all expenses are the same, will have to be $150,000 more.
So we continue to push it down the road, is what you're saying?
Yes.
For the increase. Got it.
Does the sale of the, like, city property, like if we had property we could sell, things like that, how can that affect this?
Same way, it's just a one-time revenue, right? So you think of it as a revenue, if you got an excess, it's sort of found money, right? Okay, we've got a little pot of money here, we can put that into next year's revenue side of things, but if you don't change the expenses, it's only a one-time buy down, and then the next year's levy increase. Now, the levy isn't gonna go up any more than it otherwise would, but the levy increase, because you're starting from a lower point, will be higher.
Well, so, like 9-0, where's council? We asking staff to try to drill down a little bit more, are we comfortable with that number, or what do you? Sounds like you're looking to do that, which
Well-
I tend to, would like to see.
You're fighting the
But-
number though.
But,
I would like it lower, but I mean, you can go through all kinds of mental gymnastics. The reality is that unless you're gonna,
It's coming back to you.
unless you're gonna make a, you know, a cut that you're planning to cut for the next 10 years, I mean, it is what it is. We started off this budget cycle at 20%, you know, and then staff sharpened the pencil a lot, got us down to low teens, and then now we're in single digits, which I mean, we've heard from a lot of people in the public, like, we can't be double digits again, or not. So, in spite of my pressing on staff, I support this.
I would tend to agree, I think that leaving just, we do have a couple weeks for the staff, for residents to come in and voice their concerns. Being able to take that time, because a lot to actually listen to them, because a lot of times they think it's already no use for them coming to speak. So the message to the public is come speak, there's still some opportunity, but we're getting real close to that date coming and really need to make a decision. I know you don't like going into that night of that truth in taxation and then having to shave a little bit more off, because you're looking for approval that night, correct?
Yeah.
So that's not ideal. But I still want the public to have an opportunity to the very end to have their.
Absolutely. I And if there's, you know, significant comment at that night and you wanna take more time, it's just a matter of calling a special meeting to approve that budget. I mean, I think Washington County just put out their thing saying, hearing is this night, but we're gonna approve it the next meeting. They're not gonna do it on the same night. And what we can do is we'll have this sheet with us, right? And so it's easy enough, for us to plug and chug it if we sort of pick one of these things. And I think that's what I would just leave you with, is just that, whether it's a member of the public thinking about how they wanna express their concern to you, or you yourself as a council member thinking about the budget, is that you have sort of two choices in my mind. You lower the levy with the knowledge that that will raise next year's, not levy, but increase, or you lower the levy by cutting something that will remain cut for an extended period of time. So instead of spending $1 million a year on roads, we're gonna spend $900,000 a year on roads. I'm just making numbers up, but that's just, you're accepting a lower service level.
Is this something we can produce on behalf of the city, not the county, kind of break it down and show people really where their money's going?
Yeah, I think in your
this
packet
is really
tonight,
powerful to
yeah.
see in your program, that
Yep.
this is what came in the mail recently, so.
and I think in your packet tonight, we have a little bit of a one-sheeter there that, certainly take comments on. Yeah, why don't you pull that up?
I like the way they break the dollar bill out, I like the way they put the chart on there where the money's being allocated primarily coinciding with the dollar bill. I think breaking it down to a sense is important.
Nice job,
Where'd you get that? Just see it.
That dollar bill graphic won like budget graphic of the year for like 6 years in a row for like Minnesota GFOA and just GFOA in general. They were like, this is groundbreaking for finance.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think when you get your tax statements, like a lot of us got recently, and even the tax statements now are more transparent. They've really broken out the city taxes, the county taxes, the school levies, you know, then the watershed, which is what they call it, it was called, something special thing, it's like, you know, I think that was a powerful piece, I think that's a powerful piece as well.
Yep, so this is there's two, well, I'll let Kelly explain.
So there is 2 of these in your packet. Can for sure break it down more so it's as detailed as the county one. But with this, we can look at what our total proposed budget is, what that tax rate increase is, what the levy increase is, and then it has the community impact, and then what that monthly homeowner tax bill increase, that's what it's averaging out to be if you have a home value close to that. And then on the far side, we have the breakdown of the 2026 budget increases. And so over the past couple weeks, I've been getting a lot of phone calls asking me what actually is triggering that increase. And so I thought if we just put it out in the public, we lay it out like this, these are easy talking points where people can see, oh, that makes sense, oh, that makes sense. And then when you look at the bottom of the page, that's when you have that true breakdown of what the levy is going to. And then Jolene, if you can go on the next page. So this is what the staff recommendation was prior to then having that start date be 2 months later. So this would even be decreased further, but it is just the same layout, just different colors because this is a staff recommendation as still what is approved in our general levy is that, primary general levy is that 12.59%. So this is just a recommendation that we've received from council so far to this day.
No, that's great.
We can certainly revise this if you wanted to be at 8.9 and come out of tonight, or whatever you wanted to, direction you came out of tonight.
And I can get this turned around and to you guys by tomorrow, probably midday. And then if you want to print copies off, I can even have copies printed off waiting here for you if you think looking at this is easier. But for sure, when we go into the truth and taxation meeting, when we have that number more solidified, this will be sitting there when people can pick it up and look at when they can write their name down. Just because we'll go through that meeting, we'll say big numbers, we'll talk about all these big fancy things, but this is broken down where you can see the impacts it'll have directly to you.
with parks maintenance,
Comes out of the parks maintenance, which is out of the,
general levy. Not out of the parks.
it's general levy, it's not out of, oh, okay.
You can see up there, parks is 9%. You know, and I think a lot of people look at it, gee, first public works is only 10%, administration is 23%. But you gotta remember, this is just the portion of public works that has nothing to do with sewer, water, or stormwater. And those are all coming out of utility funds, so this is just the public works department. Expenses that have to do with streets, parks, general maintenance
I
around the
think
city.
that's where this one's nice too.
Yeah,
What is that money for? You know, they break it down in the county, you know, here's what this is going for out of the money we're taking.
So, do you want to direct Ellie to do this on 8.9? I mean, conversion, I think, run the numbers differently and do something similar.
So,
I don't know what else we can do, I mean, unless we make some real drastic changes.
no, I mean, I think that goes counter to what we tried to work on for a couple of years.
I think you're right, yeah, I think we're 100% right. We gotta rebuild our infrastructure, we have to improve our roads, we have to get our office, our city functioning like it should function, you know, we need the people, and we have to have public safety, you know, I mean, we have to have equipment.
Right, so that's almost final direction. Maybe a little bit between now and the eighth, but it's pretty close, so appreciate the staff's work on this. I think there's a good story to be told here, like what Councilmember Barretts said. That you've got a goal here of trying to do a lot of things. And we've done a lot of great things, and it's just a continuation of it.
Yeah, I agree, good progress.
All right, anything else? Anyone this evening? With that, meeting's adjourned. Mr. Miller, I'm done. Done. I'm not best
Oh, no, you didn't mind.
Well, my allegation is that it makes sense. Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Kind of, you know, yes.
It's not in our contract. They tried to impose them earlier.
yeah.
Well, they called it rent, and the city created a fee schedule. Now, what it goes down to is 31
Whatever's
lots
there,
over
was there
10 years,
before,
that's $280 a year.
could
So
take
they
it
started
down.
sending almost all bills for $280. It's not in our contract.
So, yeah, I don't think we ever
That's my
discovered any.
point. We rent lots, that's
Councilman
it.
said, no parking
I
here,
wasn't here
what
to
we should have, or have no parking.
Well, I have sympathy for what you're going through, thank you for your service. It's all managing
But
resources
to the
and
Jensen,
making our choices.
the Jason
The
Avenue,
council
same
2016
kind
was rather.
of concept, if you take it down, you put it back up, if it's not right, you put it back up.
But Ed Eigner, you're on the council, he says those airport people, they think, what's in it? We have a contract. Now, there's a kosher way to go about this, pass, if everybody signs off on it, it's okay. When they ask me, and my dad, people were against it, because the only candidate voted against it. And the entire commission, don't take me to the contract. Ricky Ashback, he went around the airport trying to sell this, he never got the lead. He got to push back, he said, don't worry about it, I've got a contract, it's not in our contract, we'll just approve the runways. Don Steeler has a hangar there. I don't think so.
Don't worry, Mark, I saved that.
No. Okay. Yeah, well, just let me finish my point. Rick Ashback, he said, don't worry about it, it's on the contract